This conference will now be recorded.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's 2 o'clock, so we are going to begin. Welcome to the Literacy 2030 Family Engagement webinar. This is Lee D'Amico with the College of Education at the University of South Carolina, and USC has been pleased to partner with the South Carolina State Library on the Literacy 2030 initiative. For those of you who may not know, Literacy 2030 is a statewide initiative with a goal of 100% literacy by the year 2030. And the initiative focuses on 4 areas of literacy: early literacy, grade level literacy, teen literacy, and adult literacy. And after work in early literacy in the initial years, we've moved the focus to grade level literacy in 2018, 2019. This is our third webinar in a series focused on grade level reading. We hope you may have been in attendance at the previous webinars. We started in the fall with a webinar about pathways to grade level reading that explored aspects of early childhood literacy that bridge to grade level reading. The second webinar focused on school library partnerships, and we heard from teachers and public library staff in Greenville, South Carolina and Beaufort, South Carolina, related to literacy circles and book clubs. Now we are focusing on strategies to engage families in early literacy and grade level literacy. And we'll hear from Joe Giudice, who serves on the Family Engagement Task Force of the American Public Library Association and who is director of the Dallas Public Library. Then we will hear from Caroline Smith, the Inclusive Service Consultant at the South Carolina State Library. So I'm going to introduce Joe first, and we'll move to her. Joe Giudice has been at the Dallas Public Library for almost 16 years, 5 of which she has served as its director. She worked her way up through the ranks from children's librarian, branch manager, youth services administrator, and interim assistant director before becoming the director. And this gave her the chance to work at all levels of library service. As director, she has initiated a homeless engagement initiative, ESL GED classes, a GED testing center, small business entrepreneurial center, and a family-focused summer reading program. Joe attended the University of Florida, where she earned a bachelor's in journalism, and she earned her master's in library and informational sciences here at USC. So welcome, Joe. We look forward to your presentation about engaging families.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. From sunny Dallas today. You may have seen us on the news on Sunday when we had a microburst, they're calling it, where we had quite some weather, and one of my buildings lost 2 of its 4 walls. Those walls were windows. So we're having some struggles here today, but I'm really happy to get to talk to my friends in South Carolina. So Dallas Public Library serves a population of 1.2 million people over 340 square miles. The library itself has 29 locations, one of which is the Central Library in downtown, which is a 10-story building. So while we are uniquely large, everything's bigger in Texas, right? I'm very concentrating on relating it to all sizes of libraries today. So hopefully we'll be able to speak to everyone. The one big thing that happened in Dallas most recently, other than the weather, is that on May 22, we went fine-free as a system. So we are very excited about that. We've welcomed back about 1,900 customers using their library cards again, and that's good news for everyone. So next slide, please. So a little bit of background on what PLA has done for family engagement. We started this initiative back in 2015 when the task force was initiated. We're still in existence today. And if anybody is interested in joining the task force, let me know, because we do have some openings and we'd welcome some fresh faces on the team. We are charged with helping public libraries learn about and implement successful family engagement practices. So what is family engagement? Why do we think it's important? Well, it really is a shared responsibility among all libraries, families, educators, communities to support children's learning and development. We've always been really good at that. Family engagement really begins at birth and continues through young adulthood. We all know, most of those who are involved in children's services, that children only spend about 20% of their waking hours in school. And we all know that learning happens both in school and out of school. So we really have adopted this anywhere, anytime learning thought behind this. And we know that children and teens thrive when they have opportunities to explore and discover their interests in different spaces and different locales, including the home, but also out in the community and in the library. But specifically for public libraries, family engagement is a really natural step in supporting learning. You know, we started it with the Every Child Ready to Read, or ECRR program, which supports parents basically. But this created a springboard for new ideas and practices for libraries to use. And ECRR is really the foundation for the new family engagement initiative. So in 2018, PLA released a free promotional toolkit designed for libraries. And this newish resource can be used to supplement our marketing and fundraising and community relations. So on the screen, you can see, you can go to the PLA website and use the Public Library's Vital Space for Family Engagement PDF, and also this idea book. So the idea book really came out of all the research we did as a task force and gives you solid examples of programming from around the country. But I'm going to give you some examples from Dallas that hopefully you might be able to implement a little later. That's your homework. These are all available on the ALA website for download, so don't go looking at it yet. First, let me just give you some of the highlights. So if we can go to the next slide. So PLA's engagement is wrapped around the tenet of these 5 R's, and that's how we're looking at the programming, or how you can plan your programming. So, okay, family engagement really is all about relationships, and it begins with reaching out to families in your community. The 5 R's is our foundation and our strategy to get more libraries thinking along these lines. So we all do outreach in our communities, but how can you morph that ever so slightly so that it's not just focused on one demographic like children? I think we all do a really great job of reaching out to the kids. We're great at visiting schools before they end. We can hook them into summer reading, but what else can we do to reach out to the entire family? What other groups could you be reaching out to, like the formerly incarcerated or homeless? The one thing you can do best, easiest, is to get outside the walls of your building and provide services where families you want to reach are already going. So that's an easy get. For example, the DC Public Library, excuse me, set up a virtual visitation station at 2 of its branches so families could connect via the internet and share storybooks with incarcerated parents. So reach out is that first R. The second R is raising up. So families have important feedback to give us, and we need to listen to them. We need to stop thinking that we are there to improve the parent, and rather we should be focusing on what families are already doing and provide them with some support. A simple way to do this is to conduct a community needs assessment or include families on your planning teams, or simply, this is what we do, just plain talk to them when they visit your locations. Actually listen to what the parents want from you. Excuse me. The third R is critical that we help families understand their roles in all stages and ages of their kids' life. For the very young, we're good at helping them be ready to learn when they enter school. So they need that parental environment really to get that smooth transition for student success. But as they get older, they need a little more autonomy. But our support is still essential at that level. So what can you do? Team up with your local Head Start, partner with early childhood orgs, help promote school registration, What about inviting teachers to participate in library programs to reinforce that connection? The fourth R is relate. Libraries offer opportunities for families to build on social relationships and increase connections with peers. So start to incorporate adult and children's activities at the same time. Give adults time to visit before or after a children's program, pretty easy. Casual programs like game day with puzzles or board games is a great way to get entire families socializing together. And it doesn't hurt if you have the ability to offer food or every now and then even adult beverages. You can also give parents an opportunity to take on leadership roles in your program, like offering to teach something that they have a special talent for. Something like leading a program in a foreign language. We're great at sharing knowledge, and we can train them to do some of the things that we do. And finally, reimagining. We need to find a new perspective on what learning looks like, but this can be easily developed through partnerships because we learn anywhere and everywhere. So map out the different organizations in your community to understand where children and youth learn. Start conversations with community groups. One resource that I mind is the daily business section of my newspaper. And yeah, I still read it in paper. I look at what's opening up, what's being advertised for family engagement, then I look for gaps to see where there's something I might be able to fill. So the next slide is really about how I've morphed this program for Dallas. So I look at these key elements: hiring, staff, and training. Now, not all of you have the ability to have a voice in who is hired and how you hire, but I've started to look for people that bring other skills to the table. I look for people who've never worked in a library. Shocking, I know, but at the paraprofessional level, you could do that because we can teach them how to do the library part of the job, but you can't teach a passion for math or science or knitting or anything else. So start asking your applicants what they enjoy besides the library and reading, because all of our applicants love us and love the library, or they wouldn't be applying. Even when hiring librarians, ask about their hobbies. Look at their undergraduate degree and see how you can engage that to start more programming that's multi-generational. New partnerships we talked about a little bit. We all partner with schools and daycare, the police department, the fire department, when we get super focused on our kids. But how can you expand that to include the parent or the caregiver? Again, mine your local news for active groups. See how you can help them and they can help you. We always have space and they usually need space to meet. Then what can you get from them in return? The good news is I haven't met anyone at a public meeting that hates a library. Most everyone has a fond memory of a librarian who helped them as a kid. So capitalize on that feel good. But most importantly, you need to leave your building to do this. Attend community meetings, go to coffee with cops. That's something they do here in Dallas. Attend your city or county council meetings. Check out who else is in the audience. This is how I met the representative of our natural gas supplier, Atmos Energy. They now support 5 initiatives here at Dallas, ranging from GED testing to youth programs. And most large companies have a charitable giving arm. You just need to find them in your community. Breaking down internal silos is something we need to work on a little bit. I had a team working on adult programming. I had a team for teen programs. I had a team for children's programs, and they never spoke to each other. But now they all office together, and it was simply as easy as changing some of the desk arrangements. So we need that internal conversation so that programs could be developed together. The last one, and I think probably the most important one, is reflecting your community needs. So, if you only remember one thing from what I say today, this is what I'd like you to remember. Stop telling your community what they need. Librarians, I think, are the worst and the best people. We have everyone's best interests at heart, but we need to be better listeners. Ask your patrons, customers, whatever you call them, what they need and what they want from you. Then do your best to make it happen. We have a simple form here at all of our public service desks so staff can report anything a customer mentions to them in passing. They might say, oh, my cousin needs to learn how to read, or I wish I had somebody to help my teenager learn how to drive, or, I've always wanted to learn how to knit. My father needs help learning to use a computer. Whatever it is, we write it down, and every month we review it to see if we are meeting the needs in that community. We also do an annual survey, see how we're doing. It's pretty simple. We need to communicate better instead of assuming we know what everyone wants. We also have to be brave enough, wait for it, to stop doing something that we've always done just because we've always done it that way. And it's probably the hardest thing you will do or get your staff to do if you're in a leadership position. A good source for some more ideas before I just jump into what Dallas is doing is the Global Family Research Project. They worked with us on the task force to create the idea book. So look them up online, subscribe to their newsletter. They're always coming up with inventive things to do. So now for some solid examples of what we're doing in Dallas. Next slide. We'll show you the Grawweiler Park Branch Get Fit Club. So this comes under hiring staff with other passions. So Yenny, who's in the pink pants there in the middle, and you can't really see it, but she does have purple hair, which I absolutely love. She is a clerk or a customer service representative, as we call them, who basically checks out the books. She used to collect fines, but we don't do that anymore. But she has her own personal passion for nutrition and health. And her branch is in a highly Hispanic neighborhood, which struggles sometimes with what to eat and how to exercise. Luckily, this location, as the name implies, is next to a park. So she started a walking group. They simply walk around the park. While they're walking, she gets to talk to them. They talk about eating right. She's brought in speakers. But the beauty of it is they don't come back and sit at the library to listen to the speaker. All the speakers walk with the group. Now, it started out with mostly women. They go 6 days a week, and you can see to the right of that picture, there's a walker in that picture. So it's all levels of activity, and even some guys have joined, and when they range in age from like 80 to babies and strollers and everything in between. It cost us nothing to do this other than rearranging her desk schedule to give her this opportunity. Next slide. A partnership that we created was the Dallas Morning News, our local newspaper. The Hispanic Family Network was created to teach social media to really target a certain demographic. It was the Hispanic families. And the message we were trying to get out into the community was pre-K enrollment. That was our goal. It started out as the Hispanic Women's Network, but the dads quickly wanted to be included, and we just had to change the name. So if you have not engaged your local newspaper, call them today. We have similar goals. We all want readers, and I guarantee you that they will want to partner with you. This relationship with the Dallas Morning News has grown. We now do an annual book festival together. They bring in authors for us, and we partner back and forth on the PR and marketing. They feature us in feel-good stories. Often when they're looking for good news, they come to the library first. We've also gained partners through this relationship in our local PBS station and also our public radio station. So call your local newspaper and get them to support you. Next slide. One thing we did in working with our city, because we are a city department, is working with City Hall. Our Bureau of Vital Statistics used to be located inside our City Hall building. These families had to go through a metal detector to get into the building, and it was not user-friendly. Through a conversation with Building Services, I suggested we move the Bureau of Vital Statistics to the library. Now, I have a great big building with lots of space. This is on the first floor. Used to be my used bookstore. used bookstore was not supporting anybody, not even the one person employed there. So we closed it down, had a little remodel, and now we do birth and death certificates inside the central library. This gives us over 300 potential new customers every day, most of them coming in with their families. And so staff engage with as they're waiting for the birth certificates to be printed. So if you reach out to your community and find out how you can either go visit Bureau of Vital Statistics, that's actually how this got started, is we used to go do story time in their waiting room for all of the families who were waiting. And that's how I came up with the idea of they should be at the library, not at City Hall. So go visit other locations and see how you can interact with the customers if you're not able to actually move them to your building. Next slide. Also under new partnerships, well, we have ongoing partnerships with the Nasher Sculpture Center, which is our sculpture art garden. We also partner with the Dallas Museum of Art, where staff go out and do story time at these locations. So, pretty easy just to do it once a month, and it gets us out into the community, and we get to interact with people that maybe have forgotten about the library or don't come visit the library for whatever reason. So again, it's about getting out of your building. Next slide. Under breaking down silos, this was really where we hit it out of the ballpark. We scheduled a discovery fair with programs for children and adults happening at the same time. So it took a collaboration of all the staff to come up with it. Of course, most of these pictures show the kids and the parents helping them. But again, the whole family was there and they were all working together. We also haven't changed our summer reading program, which is called the Mayor's Summer Reading Challenge. And it is a full family program. 0 to death is our entry level. So just not for kids. We also have our English language classes and added kids component to them. So most of the Saturday programs or evening programs, the adults spend some time in class learning to speak English. The children are separated in a separate program doing STEM or SMART activities, as we call them. That's science, math, art, reading, and technology. Change the letters around a bit. But then we don't keep them apart, and that's the key. The children and the adults come together for about 20 minutes at the end of each program, and the children lead the program. So the children have learned a science type project. Then it's their goal to teach it to the parent, get the parents to practice their English, and then we do what's called a reverse science fair. So the children get to be the judges of the parents' science project. And it's lots of fun. It reverses some roles, and it gives the parents an opportunity to try new words in English, but it also gives the children a leadership role in the family. Next slide. So we partnered with our fire and rescue department to train the whole family how to do CPR. So I bet your Red Cross will do it for you if your fire department doesn't offer this program. But what better way to bring the family together to talk about health and safety? And, fire trucks always bring the kids out. So getting the fire department to do a project like this, and then actually, coming up on the summer with swimming and accidents, training everyone to be able to do CPR is super important. Next slide. So again, remember that you have a lot of different demographics out there, and not, everyone is housed. So we have our homeless engagement initiative that has an actual family component, because we do have full families that are dealing with housing issues or homelessness. So concentrating on a demographic that's in your community, find out how you can reach them. Sometimes it's easy as having some snacks and having a program where they can come and socialize and be in a normal environment. This program we set up, it's just a social program, because They don't get to sit around in their living room at night and play a game or have a friend over to play games or watch TV because that's not the environment they live in. So we're trying to replicate something as simple as what you would enjoy at home at the library in a safe environment and get them opportunities to meet other families, whether they're housed or unhoused. Next slide. That's perfect. Get outside your building a little bit. We're in the Southwest Center Mall here doing story time. Next slide. And then we have a book bite that goes out into the community. So just get to community events and promote yourself as best you can. And I'll wrap it up on the last slide. Thanks for being here today. And there's all my contact information. If you need to get in touch with me and ask questions, happy to communicate with anyone. And thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much, Joe. That was great information, and it sounds like some great things happening in town. For sharing. We open it up for questions now. If people have questions for Joe.
The back corner that's right there is somebody sitting in that chair. I spend a lot of time here, so.
I get around it.
Yeah.
I'm there for you.
All right, appreciate it. Thank you.
There you go. So does anyone have any questions for Joe? If so, you can go ahead and unmute your microphone, or you can put something in the chat box.
And we are recording this webinar, so it will be available after today for those who are here and or those who were not able to come today.
All right, so since we don't have any questions yet, we're going to go ahead and move on to our next presenter. My name is Rebecca Antill. I'm the Youth Services Consultant for the South Carolina State Library, and I am pleased to introduce Caroline Smith, who is our Inclusive Services Consultant here. Caroline focuses on making library services more accessible and inclusive to everyone, overcoming barriers faced by people with disabilities, Spanish speakers, immigrants, all kinds of populations. Carol, previously to her job here, worked as the Youth Services Manager at the Dorchester Road Regional Branch in Charleston County, where she spent a lot of time working with Hispanic and Latino families. And so she's going to talk a little bit about working with multicultural families in literacy efforts and how that looks a little bit different than working with some of our other families.
Right. Thank you, Rebecca. And this will just be a brief overview, and it's something that I would be happy to talk with anyone in more detail as well after the webinar. So moving to the next slide here, I'm sure all of you are somewhat familiar with the demographics in South Carolina, and these stats from the Census Bureau are a few years old, but the average Hispanic Latino population is 5.5%, and that does not include immigrants from other areas, and that would also include people who were born here as well. But we know that South Carolina has been one of the most rapidly, our Hispanic population has been one of the most rapidly growing in the country. At one time, it was the most, the state with the most growth. And that's something that we continue to see, but our immigrant population is not at all limited to just Hispanics and Latinos. So I have a list there on the right of the screen showing the top 10 other languages spoken as of 2009 and 2013. And you may also see, depending on where your library is located, a much higher concentration. For example, when I worked at a branch library in North Charleston, our elementary schools had over a 20% Latino population, with one at about 60%. So if you go into certain neighborhoods and certain schools, you may be in a majority immigrant community. And then for a little background on some of the issues that you may see and some of the common scenarios in immigrant families, whether they're Latino or from a different area, I have some stats here from Guatemala because I had the privilege of visiting Guatemala to work in a library last year and learn about their population, and they had one of the lowest literacy rates, especially when you look at the literacy rates of indigenous people and indigenous women. So Guatemala is one of the major regions where our immigrants in South Carolina are immigrating from, especially around areas like Saluda County. And I certainly met a lot of people from Guatemala, El Salvador, and the Honduras, and areas like that when I worked in North Charleston. So some of the issues that you may see are even within the Latino and Hispanic communities, Spanish may not be their first language. They may speak an indigenous language, of which there are dozens in Latin America, if not more. And so they may not be literate in Spanish, or it's very common for people to stop school around 6th grade. And so the parents of the children that you're working with may not be literate themselves or may not be fluent Spanish speakers as well as English speakers. They may also have not grown up with a culture of books or reading. In Guatemala, for example, books are very expensive. And you see on your screen there a picture of the school I visited, and that is really the exception. That was an extremely nice library for Guatemala. With the children are very happy to see those books, but most children would not have that experience even if they get to go to a municipal library or a community library. They just would not have the same access, and the families may have other ways of passing down stories and more oral stories and songs, but reading and reading for fun may not be a part of their culture or their background. And that said, all of that does affect your work as librarians or educators or caregivers, but you want to be aware of that, but not stereotype, because you will have a full range of people with some very highly educated and very literate from the same areas and others who are not, but just be aware. Right, and moving on. So building relationships, this is something we talked about a good bit earlier, but if you're working with someone from a multicultural background that may not be familiar with the school system here or the library systems here, or how to read to their children and encourage literacy, you'll want to start by building relationships with them. And so getting to know your community, what your demographics are, and then identifying those community leaders, whether it's a parent that you're seeing or a family or someone at another organization like the schools, libraries, Head Start, First Steps, or there may be an immigrant or a Latino organization in your area as well. I'm sure there are, and if not, I can connect you with some statewide people. Go into their spaces. If the library is not something they're comfortable going to, you can attend community events, ask to visit, say I would visit Hispanic Parents Nights at the local school, where they would have a lot of information in Spanish, or local fairs, or going to an English language class for parents and bringing materials with you so you can talk about the library or other services. Use their languages. So even if you don't speak Spanish or don't speak whatever language your community members speak, you can use their language through partnerships with other people in the community. Try to find someone bilingual who is willing to work with you to reach this community. You can have information translated, whether you find a volunteer or pay for a contractor to translate that for you. You can find staff that may have bilingual skills that are able to be used, and as well as partner organizations. A lot of times in the library, we rely just as our practice, we may be used to children coming in and translating for their parents. And this can be sometimes the only way to communicate, but it's not ideal. So if you have the opportunity to communicate directly with the parent through a partner or through some information or by using some of that language yourself, that just adds a new dimension to those relationships, and also takes some of that pressure off the children. And not to mention, if you're trying to reach parents that have may not speak English themselves and just have preschool age children, then those children are not going to be old enough to translate until they are in school. And then the last two items on this list really go together. The most important thing is to listen when you're building these relationships and making sure that relationship goes both ways. So you're learning about them. You're not just promoting literacy and promoting your services, because there may be things you don't understand about where they're coming from and what's getting in the way of those, why they aren't using those services. And then once you listen and you find that feedback, it does require a good bit of flexibility. Some things I already heard mentioned were generational programs. So planning things so that adults and kids can be there learning together at the same time. That may be something that they may not be used to splitting up and having one sibling going into one room and the younger sibling in another room. They may want to do things together as a family or learn better that way. So be flexible and see what the needs are of your community. Then family literacy foundations. I think it's important when you're working with multicultural families or English language learners to show that you value the contributions that they already bring and don't view these families and kids as having a deficit by maybe not knowing English or not having mastered the language. And I have here a definition of inclusion that came from ALA's Office of Diversity, Literacy and Outreach glossary of terms that I've adapted a little bit. So inclusion means an environment in which all individuals are treated fairly and respectfully, are valued for their distinctive skills, experiences, and perspectives, and have equitable access to resources and opportunities, and can contribute fully to the success of their school, child, or community. So all of that applies to promoting literacy and connecting with families from different cultural backgrounds. So look for their skills and experiences and perspectives that they can bring to the equation. One example is my library was near a refugee resettlement area, and we had a number of families that had spoke Swahili primarily. And as the kids were learning English and still weren't really comfortable reading in any language, we found out that they really enjoyed singing. And that was something that when the kids of any age came to our story times, they would pick up very quickly when we brought music along, and we found out their moms enjoyed singing at home with them as well. All right. And another way to connect the foundations of multicultural families with literacy is to make sure that you're choosing materials that affirm their cultural and linguistic foundation and books that connect to their identities. So I'm sure you've already heard that books should be windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors. So meaning windows are introducing you to some other experience that you might not have been aware of. Mirrors, you can see yourself and then enter into that other world or other experiences that you're reading about. So we have on the right there a graphic showing that our children's books that are being published still and as well in 2015 do not quite reflect our communities, even with more books about animals, trucks, and other things than there are about Latinx people, for example. So that's something to be aware of, and if you're choosing books for display or reading list or to read in a story time, to make sure that it's something that your community is going to connect with. If you're not already familiar with it, I encourage you to look up the hashtag Own Voices, which means not just a book about a diverse character, but written by an author or maybe an illustrator that has that identity themselves and is going to be writing from personal experience. So just be aware of which books you're promoting and what perspectives they're coming from. And think about, does the book reinforce common stereotypes? So you may have a book with diverse characters that is not, these children are not going to identify with. And one example, if you have children who are born here in the United States who have never left the country, and because they're in a Latino Spanish speaking family, you're reading only books set in Mexico or set in a country they've never visited, they may not identify with that book as much as they would something like A Diary of a Wimpy Kid. So I think the key is to have many different stories and many different types of stories, so that you do have Latino characters in your stories, or African American characters, or other people with disabilities, or other groups. But it's not only one type of story, like a story about immigration in the case of Latinos, but you're telling a variety of stories that they can relate to. And then my last slide here, next to last slide, is hosting a celebration. So one way to celebrate the diverse cultures of the kids you're working with and their families is to just plan a program that introduces some aspects of that culture. But when you do this, I would really want you to listen to that community and involve them in the planning process, because you want to stay away from maybe trivializing something that's very important to them and losing the meaning or cultural appropriation as well. One example program that I could recommend to you is called Dia de los Niños, Dia de los Libros, or Children's Day, Book Day. And that's a national celebration or initiative that emphasizes the importance of literacy for all children from all backgrounds. That's celebrated around April 30th of each year. I was able to do 2 Dia de los Niños programs that brought in full families of a variety of backgrounds. A lot of these programs can be bilingual, but you can use it to celebrate any culture or a variety of cultures. It does not necessarily have to be in Spanish or about Latino cultures. And there are some great resources already out there for Dia de los Niños, and that I can recommend to you that you see on your slide there. And then finally, I have my contact information here, as well as a link to a LibGuide that I've created. This has some resources for choosing diverse books, a book list, bilingual story plans, and things like that. And if there is anything else I can help you locate as you're trying to reach your communities, please send me an email.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Caroline. I'm trying to decide. I had a couple of things that I wanted to mention, and I have a couple of questions that came to my mind as you were discussing. Again, if anybody has any questions about what Caroline had to speak on, or Joe, if anything that Caroline talked about maybe prompted some additional thoughts in your mind, please go ahead and chime in. But one of the things that I was thinking about as you were talking, Caroline, was grandparents. We all know that we have a large amount of grandparents in the state who are taking care of kids, and the world in which they're raising grandbabies is a completely different world from where they were raising their kids 30, 40, 50 years ago. So what does that look like? What can libraries do to assist them? That would be a special population that we need to have specialized library services for. So what can we do, or what can we look at providing that specifically addresses the needs that grandparents have with raising their grandkids and that engagement piece?
Well, one thing I was thinking about are our policies and how focused we are on having a parent sign off on different things, and that applies to the immigrant community as well, because you may have situations where a child comes in with another adult who's taking care of them. It may be a family friend or an aunt, and I'm not sure if they are their legal guardian or not, but this is the only adult that's taking them to the library. And so it really requires putting a lot of thought into which policies are creating barriers, and what ways do you have of getting books to the children that need them, and making sure that the policy is not preventing that.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
And I imagine that would be an issue with many grandparents too, whether the grandparent is the primary caregiver or just the person that's able to take them to the library. I know that comes up a lot.
No, that's a really good point. Thank you, Caroline. And then one of my other questions, as you were talking, you had mentioned that a lot of multicultural immigrant families tend to be hesitant to be separated. So if you have programs that are for a specific age group, they're very unlikely to attend because that's not something that they're comfortable with. So I think keeping that in mind as we plan our programming, being aware of that. If we're offering something for a specific age group, what are we offering at the same time that other family members could attend? Some issues like that.
And it could even be being more flexible with your age guidelines for story time, because you may have a baby or a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old or even a school age sibling that would prefer going together to being separated. Although they may become more flexible as they get used to the library as well. So I think that's something you can approach from both sides.
Okay, great, thank you. As far as family engagement trends and best practices around the state, there's a couple of key things going on that I wanted to highlight. We have our own statewide initiative on food literacy that we began last fall, SC Read, Eat, Grow, and that is a really, really great program for bringing in the entire family. Or if we go back to those 5 R's that Joe talked about from the idea book, of really reimagining and reaching out to families in a new way for a lot of libraries. As you're able to reimagine library services and what those look like by meeting a basic need of a lot of families. We have a lot of families with young children who live below the poverty level here in South Carolina, who are struggling with food insecurity, who are struggling with obesity. Again, we have a lot of grandparents who are raising grandbabies and don't necessarily know, other than the way that they were raised with lots of fried chicken, what are best practices for raising kids. So we really see a big need in that area, and so our own statewide initiative, Read, Eat, Grow, I think is a good way to really reach out to families. And I want to go back to that idea book again. Joe, I did not see your slides ahead of time, and I did not realize that you were going to talk about that. If you do not have this printed out and sitting at your desk at your library, or you haven't looked at it, you really, 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 really should take a look at it. There's some really great ideas. There's some really great best practices. There's just some really excellent things to look at and be able to pull from that. So I highly recommend checking that out. If you're not signed up for the Global Family Research Project emails, those are also super helpful. And they just put out, in October of last year, they put out a family engagement piece talking about transforming education that also has some really helpful ideas in it. So I highly recommend looking up both of those. Let's see. How are we doing on time?
10 minutes.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions or comments? Okay. Since we don't have any questions yet, One of the programs that I wanted to mention was the Family Place Libraries that Marlborough County is doing. And that has a little bit of a early literacy focus, but is very focused on bringing in the families into the library and then connecting them with community partners. And it does a very good job of really honing in on the needs of a family, especially children ages 0 to 5. And connecting them with the organizations around them in the community that they may not already know about, and not through dry presentations, but with actual conversations, sitting there in the storytime room as the child is playing and talking about where they are developmentally and is it where they should be, talking about health and wellness practices and what are you feeding your baby and is that the best thing that you can be feeding baby, talking about music and motion and the importance of vocabulary words and how that's tied into singing to your children. So the Marion Wright Edelman Library up in Marlborough County started Family Place Library programming this spring, and they had a lot of success, and we're excited to see what they'll be able to build on that this fall. And then the Charleston County Library is doing a project with the Children's Museum of the Lowcountry to capitalize on the museum's project with brown bag STEM projects. So families who come to the museum or who go to certain library programs get a little brown lunch sack that has all sorts of materials in it. And they take that home and they build a thing. And there's not directions in it for a specific thing to build. It's what do you and your child come up with those different materials. So those are two different examples of one very intense inside the library program, as well as one that's a little bit more passive that the family can take home and find time on their own to do, that we really wanted to highlight as excellent practices for family engagement. That is all that I have. Lee, did you have anything to add?
Comment from Tricia.
Oh, and we did get a comment from Tricia about the Family Place Libraries. That is a grant project that IMLS and the State Library is very happy to support, and we're excited to see it and where we can take it. And oh, thank you, Tricia. Yes, we can definitely talk more about that later.
And this is Lee D'Amico again, and we will have a survey that goes out. So if you have any additional suggestions or there are things you would like us to focus on related to grade level literacy as we continue this focus this year, that would be great. And again, we're always looking for your suggestions on what you may need support with or talking with other libraries. So again, reach out to any of us as you are looking at these different ideas, or again, if you start one of these ideas, we'd love to hear from you about how it's working in your area. So we appreciate your time this afternoon. We'd like to give a big thank you to Joe and Caroline and Rebecca for sharing the information about what's happening in Dallas, in South Carolina, and in certain areas of South Carolina. So thank you. And again, thank you for being with us this afternoon. And this will be recorded if you would like to listen to it later.